All right, Dolphins fans, we are winding down on these training camp preview position battle videos. Rookies are already in the house, veterans reporting in a couple of days now. Today's video, we're knocking out the tight ends. I believe the final one I'm probably going to have time to get to is the safeties. If you haven't checked out the other ones, go back. They're all on the most recent videos. Check those out. As we do for these videos, leave your comments on the position. Who do you think is going to be making it? Who might be on the outside looking in? Who might be left off that initial 53-man roster? Doing it for the tight ends today, so drop those comments today. As we do for these videos, going to be sharing the screen, going to be popping up the graphics. Guys are like locked in, the starter. Guys that are, the next one would be guys that are more so suited in like backup roles. And then finally, a slide basically on guys that are going to be fighting for those final spots, for those final roster spots. So we're going to jump right in today with the tight ends, because if you look at the Dolphins tight end position, it's funny because Mike McDaniel comes over from San Francisco. The 49ers have all this success with a guy like George Kittle. And you think, you know what? Dolphins are going to have to, they're going to have to make it work with Mike Gesicki. They're going to have to figure something out at this position. It's going to be integral to our offense. Well, we paid the money to franchise tag Mike Gesicki last year. And what happened? Well, we proved that, you know what, just a guy that can be a pass-catching tight end in this offense isn't going to cut it, isn't going to get it done. And then the questions arise, well, we targeted Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle so much. Do we need a top-tier pass-catching tight end, or do we just need a body out there that can kind of suffice as both, primarily as a blocker, but then can also get it done when called upon as a pass catcher? Because I'm looked this up a little bit because I'm like, man, we didn't target the tight ends. Our top two tight ends from last year, Mike Gesicki and the guy you see there, Durham Smythe, who sort of penciled in kind of as the projected starter for this year's squad, were targeted 72 times last year. That accounted for the second fewest tight end targets of any team's top two guys. The second fewest, I think maybe it was the Giants, had the only other like that were lesser than the Miami Dolphins' top two tight ends. So if you look at Durham Smythe, man, he's never been known as this pass-catching tight end. You drafted him and you're like, wow, who's Durham Smythe? Well, you look at his time at Notre Dame and you're like, well, he's a blocker. He can pass block, he can run block. And that's essentially what he's done since being in the league. 5 years in the league, 115 career targets, 88 receptions, just 15 catches on 20 targets last year. Like I said, never been known as a primary pass catching option. So you look at this offseason, and how are the Dolphins going to address this position? Are we going to take it seriously and really try to land a top tier free agent, get one of these guys in the draft? The 2023 NFL draft was kind of known for its tight ends. And there were guys on the board multiple times when we were picking in the second, in the third round. Well, you saw what the Dolphins did. They didn't really make any splash moves in free agency. They didn't draft any of these top tier tight ends. So they're kind of showing you what their plan is. And right now that's rolling out guys that can get it done as blockers, which we'll talk a little bit more later as we move on from Smythe, and then just kind of have some project guys. And that's essentially kind of what it looks like right now. Because as we move on to the next graphic, which is those projected backups, you got Eric Soibert, who they brought in as a free agent. You got Tanner Connor, who's a holdover from last year. Actually, the only other holdover from the position. So the Dolphins kept 5 tight ends on their initial 53 roster last year. Of the guys that are in-house yet, it's Durham Smythe and Tanner Connor. All the other guys are gone. And then the other guy you're going to see here is Elijah Higgins. I'm going to start with Tanner Connor first. He comes in, undrafted free agent last year, and you don't expect much as a converted wide receiver, kind of like Elijah Higgins was as well. We'll make some comparisons throughout this video. But Tanner Connor saw 3 targets all of last season. So if you're projecting him to kind of take this step forward, you'd like to see that. But based on what we saw last year, he's not really ready for that. And we didn't expect him to light the world on fire. He was a project. He's put on some weight here over the offseason. He looks really good in OTAs, mini camps, at least physically. But I'm not quite sure that the team expects him to jump in and be this meaningful snap contributor, a guy that's going to soak up some of the targets from the tight end position. He's still a project, which kind of goes into I'm kind of going out of order here, but goes into another guy that's a project, because that's Elijah Higgins, who the Dolphins spent a 6th rounder on out of Stanford. was a wide receiver at Stanford. And now they initially, like right away, they didn't even take any time. It's like, you know what? We're converting him to tight end. So now, not only do the Dolphins have Tanner Conner, who's kind of like their fun in-house project at tight end as a guy that can be kind of a dynamic, faster playmaker, pass catcher. Well, now you got two of them. So I don't know if that's an idea of like maybe trying to create mismatches, just trying to get as many guys as possible that can do this, or if it's like, hey, this is a battle. And whoever ends up sticking it out, that's who's going to get the touches. That's who's going to get the roster spot. That's who's going to be active on game day. So that's potentially a camp battle in itself is between Tanner Conner and Elijah Higgins. I do expect a guy like Elijah Higgins to stick. 6th, 7th round guys aren't always guarantees to stick on your team's initial final 53-man roster. Some of those guys will be seen on the practice squad. Some of those guys get outright released. But I think that there's enough there with Elijah Higgins with his basically his experience as a wide receiver and his ability to run the routes and his ability to be a mismatch against those linebackers and safety due to his size. But the questions are going to be kind of similar to what they are with Tanner Conner and what they were with Mike Gesicki. And that's, well, can he get it done in the blocking? Now, I know that a lot of people are going to say, Mike Gesicki, if he would have put a little bit more into it and been more of a willing blocker, maybe he could have gotten it done. Well, by the sounds of it, I know the cliche thing to say right now is he's got the dog in him. And that's what everyone is saying about Elijah Higgins. He wants to get in there. He wants to get dirty. He wants to get nasty. He wants to be this blocker. And hey, if he can do all that, and then you can get him out running routes as well, when guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane are creating space for a guy like that, that is a nice project to have. It was a very confusing pick to me right away. But as I see what Mike McDaniel is doing with getting these playmakers and finding these guys that can be these mismatches for opposing defenses, I'm starting to see what they're doing. So I spent a lot of time on Higgins and Conner. I'll talk about Sorbert real quick. Entering his 6th NFL season. The thing about Sorbert is we need blocking tight ends. And that's what he's probably going to give you more than everything. He's never topped 24 targets in a single season. And he had a career best 148 yards on just 15 catches with the Denver Broncos last season. So we're not looking at a dynamic pass catching option at tight end right there. That's essentially a guy that can kind of spell Durham Smythe. If you want to go heavy in a formation, you can put him out there as well. But that's not a guy that Tua is going to be targeting on the regular. If he matches 15 catches again this year, I personally will be fairly surprised. That's probably what his ceiling is at there. Unless I'm completely, like I said, surprised, thrown off by his usage, he's going to see more so as that blocking option. And then you got the final guys that I kind of have listed as that battling for the backup role, battling for a roster spot. And that's Tyler Kroft, who was brought in kind of that second, third wave of free agency, and Julian Hill, who was added as an undrafted free agent. Now, it's interesting to note, I think I might have said this a little bit ago. If I didn't, the Dolphins kept 5 tight ends last year. So if they were to keep 5 again, you're keeping Smythe, you're probably keeping Soybert, Tanner Conner, Elijah Higgins. If you got those 4, then maybe a guy like Tyler Kroft can potentially stick as well. Julian Hill, I see a little bit more as that camp body guy. If he really shines, maybe he's got a chance. But if the Dolphins duplicate what they did last year, and if they keep 5 again, then I think Kroft would obviously have the leg up. Kroft is entering his 9th season, 20 receptions only, though, over his last 2 seasons, been kind of floating around the last couple of years. Last 2 seasons were with the 49ers and the New York Jets. But like I said, just a combined 20 catches over that time. So Tyler Kroft, once again, not one of these guys that you're just like, wow, dynamic pass catcher, a guy that you got to get targets to. Dolphins don't necessarily have a tight end like that on this roster right now, unless a guy like Tanner Conner can step up kind of unexpectedly, or if a guy like Elijah Higgins really pops and understands it and gets it already from year one. But that's part of it as well. It's that mental game. These guys, it's not an easy offense to understand and comprehend and get out there and actually do. So there's going to be maybe not the most interesting battles at this position, but battles nonetheless, just because of the kind of guys that we have. We've got those guys that are solidified as blockers, and then we've got those kind of experimental guys that could be a little bit more dynamic in the passing, receiving game, but they just don't have the experience. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But that is what I've got for the tight ends. Like I said to begin the video, Drop your thoughts on the position in the comments below. Let's carry on the discussion there. That is what I have got for the tight ends. Like I said, I believe I've got the safeties left. I hope to get to that one right away here right now. So that should be up the next day following this one. But until then, Miami Dolphins fans, fins up.